Blockchain Show is a podcast that demystifies cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology.
Hello, this is the Blockchain Show. Welcome back to episode number 156 with Danny Brown-Wolf, the head of partnerships and strategy at Orbs. Danny, how are you doing?
Surviving the plague.
Well, that's good to hear. This is kind of a crazy time. Luckily, we can do the podcast remotely. We've done very few face-to-face on this particular show, but where are you at and how are you faring?
So I'm in Palo Alto. So we're on pretty much lockdown. No schools, no businesses unless essential, and people are advised to stay at home. So yeah, but you're thinking about your friends all over the world, and especially in the blockchain industry. We have Orbs is headquartered in Israel, but we have offices in South Korea and in Singapore. So we've been at it for over 3 months.
So you have a pretty good insight into what's going on around the world. And it seems like it kind of got to the U.S. a little bit later, but I don't know. It just kind of illustrated how unprepared a lot of people were. I mean, you go to the stores and everything's pretty much wiped out. It's kind of madness out there. Definitely.
And we were in Davos for the World Economic Forum with the Global Blockchain Business Council. And this was end of January, and people were already, because blockchain, the community is so international, so global, people were already talking about what's happening and having insight into what's happening in China. So I guess we were a little bit more prepared than everyone else, but people like to stay optimistic until it hits them.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I imagine that a lot of your team can work remotely. Is it impacting your business noticeably yet, or other than the obvious having to stay at home?
Yeah, so having to stay at home and working remotely is something that we can do. Being a software company and already relatively spread around the world, so we know how to work like that. But think about the fact that there are no schools, and a lot of people have kids that are being homeschooled right now. So that's challenging. But of course, we're feeling relatively fortunate. If you think of people in Italy right now and people in the front line, my husband's a doctor. A lot of his friends are in the ER. So we're lucky being safe at home right now.
Yeah. My heart goes out to everyone who's affected by this. So hopefully we can bring a little bit of optimism to people. Podcasting is a great way to kind of stay connected, and we're going to keep putting out the shows during this whole time. I wanted to just have you tell us a little bit more about yourself and eventually how you got into the blockchain space, and eventually just kind of tell us about Orbs, if you would be so kind.
Yeah, of course. So my pre-blockchain life was in policy, in foreign policy, public policy in Israel. I worked at the United Nations and Israeli Parliament and at think tanks. So that gave me a pretty wide perspective that's relevant to a lot of blockchain elements and solutions that have to do with regulations and policy. How I came across blockchain is actually an interesting story. So when we moved from Israel to the United States, I was looking to get into innovation and social impact. And I started researching the space in New York. And I came across the World Food Program pilot that they did back in the day with refugees, have just a simple supply chain management and provenance to be able to track the food that goes out to refugees. Now, it sounds pretty mundane, but this is a huge problem we had at the United Nations when I worked there, because you have donor countries giving money to certain projects, but having no verification or guarantees that that food actually gets to the end user, which is a refugee. And all of a sudden you have this description of this magical technology that allows for verification, for third-party verification, external auditability. And I'm like, what is this magic stuff? So I started researching and going down the rabbit hole. And I understood that if I want to be in an area where it's going to have real social impact and leverage technology in of the fourth industrial revolution to help people, blockchain's going to be it.
I love that. That is awesome. The implications of this technology are still unfolding. I've been doing this podcast almost 4 years, and I'm still amazed how underutilized it still is, and the potentials that we can still draw from it. I wanted to talk a little bit about Orbs.
So maybe I'll give an overview about Orbs and how we identify the value of technology and what Orbs was built for. And I think that will give good context to the different use cases that we're looking at and exploring. So Orbs is a public blockchain, a public permissionless blockchain based on proof of stake. But it's very unique in the space because it was a public blockchain that was built from the ground up for enterprise and governments and not for dApps and DAOs. Our founders were working with building Ethereum applications very early on, 2016 to 2017. And they were looking to bring real existing businesses and tech companies into the blockchain space. But as they were working on these applications, they realized the inherent limitations in the designs of public blockchains that prohibit enterprise and governments from using them. And this is not just a scalability issue. And scalability is something that we've made a lot of advances on as an industry. But when the public blockchains, the Web3 blockchains, were designed for the dApps and DAOs, they were designed specifically as a shared infrastructure with token economics, that the actual dApp is controlled by token economics. And that has a lot of design implications. Some of them are lack of isolation. On Ethereum and another public blockchain, an application shares the resources with other applications that has security implications like the DAO bug and the fear of enterprise and governments that there is a mechanism that they don't really understand how that mechanism works, but that is a mechanism that is out of their control, where potentially the history can be rolled back. And that's something that's a big no-no. But even on a more practical level, there are usability issues with the lack of isolation. Think about if I go to a real company, a Fortune 100 company, and I pitch them this blockchain solution. They love the use case. They see the value in it. And then I get to the CFO, and the CFO says, well, how much is this going to cost me per year, working on this infrastructure? And if you're working on these public blockchains, you would kind of have to say, well, so we don't really know because it's per transaction. But not only that, the more you use it, the more expensive it gets because there's a diseconomy of scale. And also, the more others use it, the more expensive it gets for you. At that point, you totally lost him. He's shutting you the door. When you understand what businesses need, and you have the opportunity, as we had in 2017, to build something from the ground up that suits them, that gave us this unique approach to the space that's not competing with infrastructures that are looking at dApps and DAOs, but are actually, we see ourselves as more competitors to the private blockchains because we go after the Hyperledger clients and the private Ethereum instances clients. And we tell them the real value in your use case is with public blockchain. Private blockchains, if you call them a blockchain, DLTs, we've had DLT technology for 20 years. There's not a lot of innovation there, and a lot of the use cases, the real value of it is the fact that it's open source, that it's permissionless, that it's externally auditable, that there's a set governance, and that all derives from being permissionless infrastructure. So that's what we do.
Just to expand on what you were saying there, a lot of times businesses are rewarded for, earning money, obviously expanding on their shares for the shareholders, and governments are sometimes, they're allotted money, and if they don't use all of the money, then the next time the budget meeting happens, they're going to get less money. So they're encouraged to spend more money or sometimes on frivolous things. So just kind of like the dichotomy between businesses and government, you bring up an interesting point, and I like how a public blockchain is obviously the better alternative, but when it comes to governments and businesses, is it more about they want to have more control over what they're doing, or because you mentioned the fear of not having. I'm not sure if control is the right word, but having that open source aspect to it's kind of like the traditional institutions just more hesitant to adopt this technology because it's just so new. And where is that fear kind of originating from, I guess, is my question.
That's a great one too, because it took us a lot of different processes with enterprise and governments to identify exactly what are their needs and what are their fears with using blockchain technology. And we actually found that open source and transparency is less of a problem. Governments, a lot of the use cases that we go after are already mandated by law for transparency. They just do it in a very manual way, an inefficient way. So if you think about use cases for governments, public procurement processes, these are all things that by law, most countries then release that information after anyways. So that's the transparency is not an issue. For enterprises, a lot of them have gone through the same sort of thinking over the past 10, 20 years with open source in general. If 20 years ago you would have told Microsoft that most of their code is going to be open source, they'd laugh you out of the room. But it is, and most of the open source code today is contributed by large businesses, and the reason for that is we call it the Android effect, because they understand that open sourcing their code, they might be losing out on licensing fees for their code and programs, but they gain something that's much bigger, which is a network effect and a platform play, and being able to have guarantees to partners and users that make them use it more. So in the Android example, if we think back in the early days of mobile, Google was pretty late into the mobile game. iOS, Apple already had about 25% of the market share, and the rest of it was pretty compartmentalized between, Samsung had their own operating system and each one had their own. And the strategic decision for Google to make Android open source, they gave up the licensing fee, but they gained what is today over 75% market share, which is, being in the pockets of 2/3 of the world's population. It's insane. And when the reason why it worked is because being open source gave their partners guarantees. If you think about Samsung, their core business is their phones. They would never give something so important in the hands of Google if Google had monopoly and would basically be able to screw them over. So the fact that it's, let's say Google decides one day that only Google Maps are compatible with Android, what would Samsung do? It's a death sentence for Samsung, because specifically in Korea and other Asian countries, it's illegal to have foreign mapping service. So the fact that Android is open source and Google cannot abuse their monopolistic power over it gave Samsung guarantees. Now, blockchain is that guarantees on speed, okay? Because not only Samsung can fork the source code of Android and create their own version, but with blockchain, you fork the source code with the data and the live instance, which is a much greater guarantees and can lead to great use cases when you use it. So I would say that mostly to your question, the enterprise are not worried about the open source aspect, and they're more worried about the permissions. Because right now, when they look at the blockchain space, it's pretty 0 to 1. It's either you have a private blockchain where you control all the permissions of whoever's added and as a node, or it's a public blockchain where you have zero control on who the nodes are. They could be from North Korea, they could be from Iran, and they need something in the middle, and they need an evolutionary, something that would allow them for an evolution of their a blockchain application in terms of the permissions. And that's what we created with a two-tier consensus. That on the one hand, we have the validator pool that's based on proof of stake network, completely permissionless. But we added another layer of block producers that can be controlled by the specific applications. And that hybrid gives them the comfort that, okay, we can move slowly towards complete decentralization while still having the benefits of public blockchain from day one with those external guarantees that are provided by the validator network.
It's impressive that you all built it from the ground up. How difficult was that process, and when did all that begin?
It took a couple of years. So our founders they've been in the crypto space as investors. Daniel's been investing since 2013. And in 2016-17, they started working, as I mentioned, on applications on Ethereum. So they knew the space very well. They did a few of the largest companies that try to work on Ethereum. And they did their POCs. One of them was Kin by Kik. And with those POCs and MVPs on Ethereum, they understood the limitations of Ethereum for businesses like that. So they built it from the ground up. We're very fortunate that the R&D and headquarters is in Israel, where there's fantastic talent in cryptography and network building.
That's a really good foundation you have there. Trying to stay informed these days, you would think would be easier in the age of information, as they call it, but it's actually kind of difficult to find credible information about what's really going on. I mean, sometimes you just have to get out in the world and talk to people, and even then you don't even really know what's going on. So how is what you're working on going to give us all a little bit more trust in getting credible information and a good outlook on the world?
Yeah, so we've developed a few use cases for digital media authentication. It actually started as a project we did with one of the largest media companies on copyright management. There are great projects in the space, like I don't know if you know Streambed. Michael Casey founded it, but this company specifically that we worked with, they're a huge news agency, and they had a copyright problem. They had pictures and videos coming in from all over the photographers all over the world, with different permissions on how to use them, and then they had more than 17,000 news outlets that they were sending the stuff out to. And in the mix, the actual copyright was some of it was lost, which was a huge liability. It wasn't standardized. So they thought, okay, blockchain is a great solution for this because we can have a ledger that's a source of truth for all the IP that we're creating. So we started working with them on a POC on that, and we realized that the value in using a public blockchain for this use case is that you can use that ledger to build anything on top of it and other applications as well. So the idea is to hash a photo or a video and p-hash it on the blockchain together with metadata. That metadata can be copyright, but it can actually also have the information that helps with authenticating the photo and fighting fake news. So if you have a photo where, let's say, Reuters or New York Times have their own cryptographic signature on that this is authentic by them, and this is the metadata that they authenticate that it was taken at this location and in this time, then wherever, if it's on a public blockchain, then wherever that picture is on the internet, it doesn't matter what the blog that you see it in says. You can, as an end user, you can always check the metadata and see what whoever uploaded the picture said about it. So that was a fun tool. It was even more exciting when we realized that because we built it on a public blockchain, it can be used for user-generated content. Because user-generated content is the future. It's the future of journalism. It's the future of marketing. And I think with the coronavirus epidemic, we've seen that authenticating the actual user-generated content is even more important than referencing journalism. Because in places like Wuhan in China, you didn't have any journalists in there. You only had videos that were uploaded that said these are from Wuhan, right? So, as an end user on Facebook, I see this on Facebook, I see this on Twitter. How do I know it was taken really yesterday in that location? I have no idea. I have no way to verify it.
Yeah, I really like that's something that exists, because I've had people, like smart people, who have been influenced by things they've seen on Facebook that, maybe 10 years ago they would laugh at, but now they're, it's a very influential platform, and I think having a traceable link to where some of the content originates is hugely beneficial, because you're going to be able to see, is this a credible source? Where did this originate from? Is there a bad actor somewhere along the way? Because things can just really have a chain reaction very quickly. And we saw that in America at the 2016 election. There was just, I don't know, pandemonium's not there. I don't know what the right word is, but I mean, people were just sharing all kinds of things that sometimes were just completely fabricated out of thin air. And can you speak a little bit on just kind of like the psychology of how social media and fake news is just kind of like almost like its own kind of virus?
That's funny that you say that, because I just read there was a WHO official who already on February 15th talked about coronavirus and said, and I'm quoting, we're not just fighting an epidemic, we're fighting an infodemic. Fake news spreads faster than the virus, and it's just as dangerous. And it's really true, because you don't know what to believe. You don't know if the source is authenticated or not. And I think us as technologists, especially with understanding the capabilities and value of blockchain, can create a lot of. It's about productizing, creating products that can help the population be better digital intellectuals in a way, and understanding where their content comes from in a way that's a lot more accessible than it is now. Because yes, in theory, I could take a picture and start researching on the internet and using Google like reverse photos, but I'm not actually going to do that. And definitely not for every picture that I see. We need to make it an easy product. One of the things we were thinking of is piggybacking on a product that we already know, which is the Twitter checkmark. Twitter goes through a process of KYCing specific individuals, politicians, official figures, etc., and giving them that blue checkmark that it's a verified account. What if we can extend that checkmark from the verified account to the verified content? So in Israeli election, the third one we've had this year, it's a shit show. We've had a lot of videos that they weren't completely made out of thin air, but they were edited. And they were edited in a very dangerous way that makes them fake news. So if a certain politician that has that blue check mark uploaded first this the original video from the account, that video is hashed on the blockchain with the metadata and linked to the original uploader, then as long as it's not manipulated, it can carry that check mark across Twitter and across other platforms. And as soon as it's manipulated in any way, then a p hash would actually allow us on with a blockchain to not only see that it no longer carries the check mark, but also to find similar images and be able to get to the original. So if it's sort of like to train people in a very easy way that if they don't see the check mark, then okay, they need to think twice about something. Doesn't mean that they're fake. It could be just editing because they made it shorter, right? It doesn't mean that they took it and manipulated it and made it into a deep fake. but it's giving the people more tools than they have today in an easy way to identify the originals.
I really like that. And it's kind of funny to, placing our trust in a trustless system. At first that sounds like an oxymoron, but because I know you have expertise in dealing with businesses and governments, and a lot of people participate in elections. So how do you go about pitching the idea of using technology to solve things like information surrounding an election, or even, I don't know if it's possible to use blockchain for elections. It's something we've talked about on this show for years, and we never really get anywhere with the discussion because there's a whole issue of keeping your vote anonymous, but also being able to prove that it was a person. I know it differs in different countries, but one would think that blockchain would be a good solution for this. Is that safe to say, or am I kind of out of left field here?
I think it's definitely safe to say it's a good solution. I just think we're not there yet with everything that we need in the periphery. So in order to have e-voting, you either need self-sovereign identity or some sort of digital scarcity that's connected with the real world. So in theory, yes, I can go to a DMV or an official voter registration office, register my vote, and get a token that represents scarcity that I can send with my vote, and it would be pseudo-anonymous. But I think we're not there yet. There are more things that the blockchain community is capable of right now that doesn't require the periphery and the infrastructure to accommodate. And those were even used in some ways ad hoc. We have a blog post about elections in Indonesia, where Indonesia is huge. It's very decentralized and spread out. And it takes about 3 days for all the ballots to reach the centralized location where the votes are counted. And the people in the remote ballots were worried, well, what happens in those 3 days? How do we guarantee the integrity of the ballot in those 3 days? So it was a ground up initiative. They took pictures of their records and uploaded onto public Ethereum. So to make sure that when it gets to the centralized voter counting locations, then they can match the number and the seal or whatever guarantees they try to have, and it can be verified with the original that's tamper-proof. It's easier for us, I think, to explain the use of the technology or the benefits of the technology because we mostly talk to technologists. Most of our points of contact in governments and enterprise are CIOs or CTOs. So they get it. We can go deep into the blockchain, the technology, and the guarantees that it provides. When you do talk to politicians or other decision makers, it's more about simplifying the specific benefits of a public blockchain, not explaining how it works, but explaining what it does. And what it does is the external auditability, that at any given time, anyone can have access to not only what the ledger is, but to make sure that the algorithms on it were also acting properly the way they're supposed to according to the declared governance.
I really like the external auditability aspect of what you're working on, having would you call it a neutral third-party way to verify the data?
It gives that option. Any third party can guarantee that data, and the permissionless validator network are not an interested party. And that's part of the problems also with private blockchains, that at the end of the day, even if the big enterprises that are using private blockchain, either they're the ones that are running the node, or one of the big system integrators run the nodes and the validators for them. At the end of the day, there's a dependency there because Walmart pays IBM; they're their clients. There is a dependency there. Whereas our permissionless network, they don't care. They have a proof of stake reward system that's completely not connected to anything that the app layer is doing, and they're not an interested party.
We've had other people on the show before that promote private blockchains and all different variations on the subject. And I listen to them and I see where they're coming from. And I think there's probably, I don't know, maybe it comes from a good place, or maybe they're just trying to get clients. I don't know. But I think that it sounds like what you are working on is the future, like the realization of what this tech can actually do for institutions. And, but just to move forward a little bit, how do you, just for like the everyday people listening, the lay people, do you think that what Orbs is working on is going to impact people on an individual level, or is it only going to kind of be like a top-down effect?
Interesting question. Depending on the use case. And that depends on the clients, because we are a B2B. We work with big clients, but some of them are working on a supply chain management solution, which is obviously not going to affect the end user directly, other than the fact that there'll be less fakes on the market. But on the other hand, we do have clients, like we're working with one of the big cell phone manufacturers on this question of authenticating data. So we thought, okay, you can authenticate data in many different ways, but the highest level of verification for user-generated content is if you actually have the phone camera application give those verifications directly to the blockchain. So if I have my phone camera, I take a video and then I upload it to Twitter and say this is what's going on here and here and here. My phone can give that verification that I was indeed here at this time. And that's something that can really affect a lot of end users, whether it's copyright. If you think a lot of creators, bloggers, or Instagram personalities that put a lot of content out there and need a way to claim that is theirs for copyright purposes, it can be to verify things like dating apps, like taking a selfie for a dating app, that a way to give a guarantee from the phone directly to the other users that I did take that photo from this phone at this time in this location, as opposed to using a photo of someone really hot from a Shutterstock.
Yeah, I've definitely ran into that problem before. So I'm starting to see more and more blockchain in TV shows. And I was watching the show Westworld last night, and I won't spoil anything for anybody, but one of the characters is using an app that connects him with some illegal activities, shall we say, and it's run on the blockchain. They reveal later, like in the after the show, the producers talk about this app that the guy's using, and it's designed in a way that the government can't track it. They have no idea what's going on, and this organized crime network sets up a sort of like, it's kind of like Postmates for criminals, where you get a job, you do the job, and at the end you get paid. It brought up an interesting idea when you were talking earlier about this topic. Is there a dark side to the blockchain? Is there going to be, kind of like an underground criminal? Is it going to facilitate criminal activities and make it in a way that's very hard for governments and law enforcement to track? Or is the nature of blockchain going to be, are we going to be able to audit criminal blockchains, if that makes any sense at all?
Yeah. So we also have, I didn't mention, Orbs has a social impact arm called the Hexa Foundation. We do, I guess, pro bono in a way, a lot of the NGO use cases that we help them build. But we also, under the mandate of the foundation, is doing education and advocacy for blockchain. And our founder, who heads the foundation, Netta Koren, has been a big advocate of the technology in general to legislators and government officials around the world. And one of the things that shocked them is when she explains about Bitcoin specifically, and how it's actually very stupid for criminals to use Bitcoin, because use cash or diamonds if you're going to do criminal activity. Because in Bitcoin, if you're caught with the keys with your Bitcoins, then you're a goner. Like the entire criminal record of who you gave money to, terrorist activities, etc., is all recorded and is completely immutable. So there is that aspect. The fact that it's permissionless will always have the negative and the positive. The negative, yes, some criminal activity would be on it. Although I've seen statistics that says it's much lower than with any other means like cash or other tradables. But on the other flip of the coin, the permissionless nature of it also allows for dissident to actually be able to communicate with the rest of the world, and not only communicate, but also transfer funds. Whether it's certain countries that decided that, no one's taking out money from that country. Okay, what are you supposed to do if you have a kid studying abroad and you need to send them money so they'll eat? And the government is saying to the banks, no one's taking out money from our country, especially not dollars. What are you going to do? Or dissidents being suppressed by their governments, trying to bring out information. They do have that outlet that allows them not to rely on the centralized institutions. And I think if you weigh the benefits, then you'll see that they're there and they're real and they're helping people around the world. Yes, people will always try to use new technology for criminal activity, but we're not talking about should we shut down AI because AI is being used for deep fake technology to destabilize our political system.
Yeah, it's really an amazing time to be alive, and just having access to the internet is such a huge advantage. And I appreciate what you all are working on at Orbs, kind of helping to usher in the next stage of the internet.
It's really important for everyone to understand that blockchain is not a magic solution for everything. Really the opposite. It takes specific architecture to identify where exactly the value is and focus on that. So I hope everyone will enjoy seeing that perspective.
Yeah, it's really been good talking to you. Trying to keep up. You're very knowledgeable in this space, and it's really good to have you on the show.
It's been great. Thank you for raising all these great questions and this important topic, especially today. I'm really hoping that coronavirus plus elections coming up is enough of a stimulus for the entire community to come together and say we need solutions for this, and it will push them forward quite quickly.
Very well said. I wish you all the best, and stay healthy up there, and hopefully everything comes back online in terms of the city pretty soon. So
yeah, thank you, Ethan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, goodbye. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of The Blockchain Show. My guest today was Danny Brown-Wolf, Head of Partnerships and Strategy at Orbs. I'd like to thank Danny for coming on the show during the middle of the shutdown of the city she's in. And I want to just thank everybody for listening and for staying connected during this time. We have probably half a dozen podcasts scheduled to come out in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So, as long as the internet is still on, we'll keep podcasting. And I really appreciate all the emails coming in. We've got some really great guests that have been pitched to me, and it's been a little bit of a challenge to keep up. But honestly, I'm spending so much time at home lately. There's no reason why I can't do more podcasts like this. That does incur more costs. So I am trying to seek sponsorships or, just any way to kind of facilitate doing more of these interviews, because it is a big time commitment and I'm pretty much the one paying for all this. So if you hear some ads coming up or, I don't want to ask for donations. I don't want to be that guy like I have been in the past, but maybe I'll just leave it on the website and if people find it, that's an option too. Ideally, I'd like to be able to give you something for your support. We don't sell anything. I do this podcast for free. It's all about the message, about demystifying blockchain and distributed ledger technology, promoting the widespread use of cryptocurrencies and the like. I miss doing the podcast with Steve, and I miss having Mark and Ian on the show too. So hopefully I can get them to come back for some episodes, or maybe I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I don't know. But it is really good to talk to experts in the field and to just kind of gauge where this technology is going. Unfortunately, there was part of the conversation that cut out earlier for about 3 minutes with Danny, and we were basically just talking about the positive aspects from this whole coronavirus situation. And we were talking about how her mother in Israel was working with some Palestinian startups that were able to telecommute through Zoom from Gaza. So we were just kind of celebrating how technology is kind of bridging some gaps there. I was going to have her come back and repeat that, but we already had the call drop out once during the conversation. I know she's got a busy schedule, so let's leave it there for now. Thank you, everybody, as usual, for listening, downloading, sharing, subscribing. Everything you do, really helps get this podcast out there further. And it's been a fun journey so far. I want to keep going. If you want to learn more about us, you can go to theblockchainshow.com. It's kind of just a skeleton crew right now, but we'll have the other guys back on pretty soon. Until then, stay safe out there.